Suicide Squad was received very poorly by critics, and while most people who watched it enjoyed it, like most other films that fail on some level, the reason why lies in the screenplay. In this video essay, I will be analysing where Suicide Squad failed and how they could have fixed it so you can apply this to your own work. Now, point 1. This film has no first act. This film suffers from extensive structural problems. Let me ask, where does this film start? Well, it starts in a prison. Once all of the characters are incarcerated, to give a summary of this film's structure, it flows very much like this. The characters are in prison. Amanda Waller sends them on a mission. On this mission, they rescue Amanda Waller and go to defeat the bad guy. Now, this is just my own opinion talking, so feel free to dismiss it, but this here is the opening scene. Uncut and exactly how it appears in the film. This feels wrong. To me as a writer, this feels like where the second act should be beginning. It feels like they are trying to start the story a third of the way into the movie. To illustrate my point a little better, here is a very brief depiction of the 3-act structure. By no means is it the only way to tell a story, but for movies it is used because it's considered to be the easiest way to tell a good story quickly. Now, just remember that. This is what the structure of most films looks like. Now, this is what the structure of Suicide Squad looks like. As you can see, it has 2 fundamental problems. It has no beginning act, and the final act is far too long. To be a bit more specific, the green part of this graph represents the period starting from when the characters are in prison all the way to just before they are deployed. And the red part represents the time they are in the city carrying out their mission. I found it hard to believe at first, but after a closer look I realised just how true this actually is. The third act begins 48 minutes into the movie. A huge amount of time before it would traditionally start in most other stories. Now, cutting straight to it, how can this structure be fixed? Well, firstly, there is a lot of dead weight that can be removed. Cut out the entire segment where they go to rescue Amanda Waller and waste time in the bar, as these scenes don't really add a great deal to the narrative. They are, for the most part, really just filler. So the third act in this revised script is simply a more condensed version of the time they spend in the city. So it flows a little bit like this. They get into a few fights, have a confrontation with the Joker, and then move on to the final boss battle. Now, why am I leaving in the confrontation with the Joker when so many people were so critical of it? Because it can be dramatically improved with one simple change. But we'll get to that later. Also, this structure can be improved by of course adding a first act. Now, what are we going to do with this first act? Well, an idea that I think would have been quite powerful is to simply spend the first half hour following the life of just one of the characters. Get us to intimately know and focus our investment on a single character, with no flashbacks or fancy editing or cutaways, just the life of this one character. This done right would have added something that the original film totally lacked. Character investment. Let me ask, do you recall ever actually caring for any of the characters in this film? When Diablo died, did you feel sad? Did you even remember his name? Or when Dr. Moon is assumed dead, did you feel sad then? Before I said this sentence, could you have even recalled her name? I certainly didn't feel anything for them. This film is not the Avengers. In the Avengers, we had all of the previous films that made us care for the wide cast of characters, but in this film, the creators just crammed in the characters and with almost no effort, expected us to care for them. Now, let me continue these points by presenting the second flaw in this movie. Bad characterization. The fact this film does not have a protagonist was a greatly missed opportunity. Now, back to creating a first act, there are two characters I think would have worked quite well as the protagonist, Deadshot or Harley Quinn. Now, this film needed to spend a good half hour simply getting us to know one of the characters intimately. If I were writing Deadshot as the protagonist, I would write it a little bit like this. The opening scene is him doing this assassination, which shows he is a very skilled hitman, and then afterwards he goes home to his wife, and then they might get into an extremely heated argument where she tells him that he is hurting their child and that she is afraid her daughter will end up like him. Also have a scene where maybe he talks to his daughter and she says she's afraid they will take him away, and he says, "Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere." We spend all of this time getting to know Deadshot, not as a villain with a quirky sense of humour, but as a regular man who is in a shit situation trying to make ends meet. Then Deadshot has a good day. We begin to feel hope for him as we see him better himself. Maybe he gets a phone call from a guy saying he wants a hit done. Then Deadshot looks over to his daughter and hangs up the phone. He turns down the contract. He decides to be a better man. Then maybe he takes her out to the cinema or to a theme park. They have a wonderful time and everything looks like he's a changed man, ready to live an honest life, when all of a sudden, Batman reveals himself from the shadows and arrests him. This would be so much more emotionally enriching than to just see a 3-minute flashback where Deadshot isn't even regretful for any of his misdeeds. This would not only provide a really solid character we can invest in, but also in the final scene when we see Deadshot being allowed to talk to his daughter and see him reading the letters, it would have been 2 powerful moments to end the film on a nice emotional note. Now, Deadshot as the protagonist could have easily worked, but in my honest opinion as a writer, I would have loved to see this first act, but instead having it follow Harley Quinn. Now, if I were to write this script for Harley Quinn as the protagonist, here's how I would have done it. The film starts with Harley being alone in Arkham Asylum. Spend a good 4 minutes showing us her everyday routine. Maybe show how in the staff canteen she always eats alone because nobody wants to be her friend. Spend a nice, lengthy amount of time showing us just how sad and lonely Harley's life is. Maybe have it so she is watching TV in her cheap apartment when she looks over to an empty seat and imagines a boyfriend there smiling at her because she is so desperate to be loved. Make us pity her. Then one day, someone new arrives at the asylum. She goes into the padded cell to see a figure concealed by the shadows, chained to a chair with over a dozen locks pinning him down. They start talking, and you know what? This guy, who everyone has warned her about, he's actually a really sweet guy. He has a gentle, calm voice, and he listens to her life. For the first time, she feels like she's a somebody, and we can really feel her happiness as an audience. Then he begins to talk about his life, how his dad beat him as a child, how he grew up in poverty without any love, and in turn makes her feel very sympathetic for him. And so after a long, pleasant conversation, the shadowy figure turns to say, "Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you, but I don't want to keep you. You probably need to get back to your friends." Then she replies, "Well, I don't really have any friends." Then the shadowed figure, who so far has had his face entirely in the dark, where all we can hear is his soft, sweet voice, leans forward to say, "Well, you got one now." His face is finally revealed. The Joker. She was talking to the Joker the whole time. Even if the audience were to see this twist coming, it would still send shivers down their spines, and it certainly would do to me. So, over the rest of the first act, she and the Joker grow closer and closer. Maybe they share a kiss or a few intimate secrets. Maybe she calls him the Joker and he replies, "Please, call me Mr. J." And then she says, "Oh, alright, Mr. J." Slowly we see how she totally falls for him, with him playing her vulnerable mind like a fiddle, until one day they are having their usual conversation when out of the blue, the Joker says,
"There is something you could do for me, Doctor."
Anything, yeah.
"I need a machine gun."
A machine gun?
Now, I don't know about you, but this, as well as the Deadshot rewrite, would have been so much better than a 3-minute info dump where Waller just lists off the backstories of all the characters. They could have gotten away with doing just one of these backstories, or maybe they could have managed to squeeze both in. I am not saying they should have done this for all the characters. I'm saying they should have done this for one. Having one character we genuinely care for and find interesting is 1,000 times better than having 6 characters we feel very little for. Now, personally, I think the Harley rewrite would have added the most to the story over the Deadshot one, but as I said earlier, there is a change I would have made to the Joker rescue scene later on that I believe would have turned it into a powerful one. It goes very much like this. The Suicide Squad and a handful of soldiers are walking along the street, when suddenly they are jumped by a group of the Joker's thugs. Once the soldiers are dead and the squad is incapacitated, the Joker reveals himself from behind a pillar and goes to pick up Harley. After a brief reunion where they make up, the Joker turns to Deadshot, who is defenseless on the floor. He raises his gun, ready to shoot, when Harley begins to tremble and she timidly squeaks, Puddin'? Maybe we could just, let them go. They didn't do nothing. The Joker turns back to Harley, but instead of hitting her, he smiles and gives her the gun. He tells her, "Go on, kill them. Prove your love for me." However, this would conflict because it would have been set up earlier that Harley and Deadshot really get along very well and she considers him a good friend. So, she stands there, her hand shaking in the rain as she points the gun to Deadshot's head. There is a long, tense silence as she readies to squeeze the trigger. Then, she slowly raises the gun right over Deadshot's head to point it right at the Joker. Now, you could have it so at this very moment, some of the magic foot soldiers come in and stop her from killing the Joker, but that's not what's important. What's important is the fact she actively made a choice to rebel and do the right thing. This would have been an exceptionally powerful character moment that would have given her an arc, and a good one at that. But no. This film has no character moment like this. The characters in this film are frankly terribly written. You can tell that the writer didn't even understand the basics of how to make a great villain. So clearly, he didn't watch my guide on how to make a great villain. Click on the screen now if you'd like to check it out. Now, you could easily argue that every major character in this film, with the exception of maybe Rick Flag, is a villain on some level. The only problem is, the writer failed to understand a basic rule to the human condition. Nobody views themselves as the villain. Even Hitler, the most evil man in history, believed what he was doing was for the greater good of the human race. Good and evil are entirely matters of perspective. Though I must say it really was quite the relief when I realised that this film didn't fall into the trap of making the villains accept the fact that they are actually the villains.
Stay evil, Dogface. Spread the word.
Oh, well, I guess that was only one time, and...
We're bad guys. It's what we do.
Well, I guess statistically speaking, 2 occurrences doesn't equal a trend?
Don't forget, we're the bad guys.
Oh, come on, Will Smith! I was really trying to be nice here. Damn you and whatever form of magic it is that keeps you permanently looking 30 years old. Anyway, as you can see, these characters come across like they know they are the villains in somebody else's story, and not just regular people who are being forced into a shit situation, which is what they should have tried to convey. Also, as an extra point, all of the main characters are exceptionally passive. It is a basic rule of storytelling. A character who never acts first and only ever reacts is never as compelling as a character who acts first and causes the villain to react. When you've watched a film or read a book, have you ever felt the inner urge to root for the villain? There is just some nagging part of you that wants the villain to succeed. Don't worry, this is a totally normal thing. It happens to me all the time. You will probably find that that's because the villain was a more active character than the protagonist, so the villain was a more interesting one. It's the reason why in The Dark Knight the Joker was a more compelling character than Batman, because the Joker always acted first. This carries over to Suicide Squad, or more specifically to Harley Quinn. A reason why that scene I proposed where Harley would go to shoot the Joker rather than losing him in a helicopter crash would have been so much more effective is because in my proposed scene, she would have been an active character rather than a reactive one. The fact she chooses to denounce the Joker is far more powerful than if the Joker dies and she is forced to react by denouncing him because he's dead. This would make her a much more interesting character. In summary, there are two things this movie did wrong. It had poor structure and poorly developed characters. But if I had to summarise why this movie failed in just one sentence, it would have to be this. The reason Suicide Squad failed was because it focused on plot over character, when really, it should have been doing the exact opposite. Thanks for watching today's video, I hope you enjoyed it. Recently, I've been considering starting a Patreon page for this channel. I'm not too crazy for the idea, as creating content for this channel really is just a hobby for me, but I could see where I might use the money. I could buy a better quality studio microphone, or I could buy a better editing software, which would help me increase the quality of these videos. So, if any more than, let's say, 5 of you say in the comments you'd help contribute towards a Patreon page, I'll consider creating one for my next video. Anyway, thanks for watching, please do like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time on The Closer Look.